Tonight's video is on gathering data. The topics will include different methods of collecting samples from a large population, as well as their advantages and disadvantages. One major purpose of statistics is to make an inference or logical conclusion about a large population from a smaller group called a sample. The types of sampling I will be discussing in this video are simple random sample, stratified random sample, cluster sampling, systematic sampling, and convenience sampling. In statistics, a simple random sample is a subset of individuals that are chosen from a larger set called a population. Each individual is chosen randomly and entirely by chance, such that each individual has the same probability of being chosen at any stage during the sampling process. A simple random sample is an unbiased surveying technique. An unbiased random selection of individuals is important so that if a large number of samples were drawn, the average sample would accurately represent the entire population. However, this does not guarantee that a particular sample is a perfect representation of the population. Simple random sampling merely allows one to draw valid conclusions about the entire population based on the sample. There are many ways to obtain a simple random sample. One way would be the lottery method. Each of the population members is assigned a unique number. The numbers can be placed in a bowl or in a hat and thoroughly mixed. Then a blindfolded researcher selects so many numbers. The population members having the selected numbers are included in the sample. Or you can use what's called a random generator or a random table of numbers. There are advantages of simple random sampling, and these are that it is free from personal bias, it is representative of the entire population, and its accuracy can be tested. Some disadvantages of simple random sampling is that if it is a very large population you are surveying, it is tough to completely catalog the entire population to draw that sample. And large size samples are required to ensure reliability. Time and cost of collecting data can be very large, and sometimes simple random sampling produces some non-random looking results. An example of this is jury duty. It is people are randomly chosen for jury duty, but some people are chosen way more often than others. A method of sampling that involves the division of a population into smaller groups known as strata is called stratified random sampling. In stratified random sampling, the strata are formed based on members' shared attributes or characteristics. A random sample from each stratum is taken in a number proportional to the stratum size when compared to the population. These subsets of the strata are then pooled to form a random sample. So the population is divided into two or more groups, and these according to some criterion, and it could be, some examples are by geographic location, grade level, age, income, and subsamples are randomly then selected from each of these strata. There are advantages and disadvantages of stratified samples. Some advantages are that no group is completely excluded, it has greater accuracy, and time and expense can be greatly reduced. The main advantage with stratified sampling is how it captures key population characteristics in the sample. Stratified sampling works for populations with a variety of attributes. The disadvantages of stratified samples are that it is very time-consuming, Utmost care is required to divide the population into the special groups or strata. And if different strata of population overlap, the sampling may not be representative of the entire population. Cluster sampling is a sampling technique where the entire population is divided into groups or clusters, and a random sample of these clusters are selected. All observations in the selected clusters are included in the sample. Cluster sampling is typically used when the researcher cannot get a complete list of the members of a population they wish to study, but can get a complete list of groups or clusters of the population. It is also used when a random sample would produce a list of subjects so widely scattered that surveying them would prove to be far too expensive. This sampling technique may well be more practical and/or economical than simple random sampling or stratified sampling. An example would be if we divided our school into homerooms and then randomly selected homerooms, and then we sampled all the students in those selected homerooms. The advantages of cluster sampling are that it is efficient. The researchers don't need names of all population members. It reduces travel to site. It is useful for educational research. The disadvantage of cluster sampling is that fewer sampling points make it less likely that the sample is representative of the entire population. In a systematic sample, the elements of the population are put into a list, and then every kth element in the list is chosen systematically for inclusion in the sample. For example, if the population of study contained 2,000 students at a high school, and the researcher wanted a sample of 100 students, the students would be put into list form, and then every 20th student would be selected for inclusion in the sample. So we have 2,000 high school students. We want a sample of 100 students. So do we divide 2,000 by 100? And so we could choose every 20th student to be included in the sample. To ensure against any possible human bias in this method, the researcher should select the first individual at random. This is technically called a systematic sample with a random start. The main advantage of using systematic sampling is its simplicity. It allows the researcher to add a systematic element into the random selection of subjects, yet it is very easy to do. Another advantage of systematic sampling is that it is very convenient and that it is less time-consuming. Some disadvantages, the biggest disadvantage of systematic sampling, is that the process of selecting the sample can interact with a hidden periodic trait within the population. In an extreme example, let's just say every 10th person in the population was Hispanic, and the sampling technique coincided with the periodicity of that trait. The selected sample would then be mostly or all Hispanic, which would overrepresent Hispanics in the final sample. This means the sampling technique is no longer random, and the representativeness of the sample is compromised. The number of errors in systematic sampling is high, and they're very difficult to identify. Convenience sampling is a type of non-probability sampling which involves the sample being drawn from that part of the population which is close to hand. That is, a sample population selected because it is readily available and convenient. The researcher using such a sample cannot scientifically make generalizations about the total population from this sample because it would not be representative enough. So it is done at the convenience of the researcher. So of course the advantages of convenient sampling are that it is convenient, economical, and less time consuming. But the disadvantages are that it is not very representative of the entire population, and the results may be biased and unsatisfactory. The last type of sampling I would like to discuss is voluntary response sampling. In this sampling, individuals choose to be involved. These samples are very susceptible to being biased because different people are motivated to respond or not. These voluntary response sampling are often called public opinion polls. These polls are not considered valid or scientific. Bias is when sample designs systematically favor a particular outcome. An example of voluntary response sampling is from Ann Landers when she summarized her responses of readers and found that 75% of 10,000 parents wrote in to say that having kids was not worth it. If they had to do it over again, they wouldn't. Now, this is a biased statement because most letters to newspapers are written by disgruntled people. A random sample showed that 91% of parents would have kids again. This is the end of the video on sampling methods, so do not forget to complete your WSQ in your spiral notebook.